Happy Monday, everyone. This is Martha with Nature Niche, and I'm excited this week to share another Hawaii birding and forest ecology adventure with you. It was well worth the very rough drive up to the Palila Forest Discovery Trail, which we accessed off of the Saddle Road and the Kilohana Hunter Check-in Station. And this area is part of the Kauai restoration area.
So we're out at another great birding spot along the Hawai'i Birding Trail at the Palila Forest Discovery Trail. This is a high elevation dry forest on Mauna Kea, and we are well above the tropical rain clouds, and the flora and fauna up here has to be really well adapted to extremely dry conditions. This area receives about 20 inches of rain per year, and cold conditions. It can actually frost out here in the winter months. I wouldn't call this a family-friendly trail. It was a 4-mile drive with four-wheel drive. You have to have a four-wheel drive vehicle to get up here to the trailhead, and once you do, it's a 1-mile loop trail. We've been stepping over lava, but oh, it's so neat. And you'll see plants and animals here that you won't see anywhere else in the world. Some of Hawaii's native endemic birds and some great native plants as well. And this is one of the last large tracts of dry forest left in Hawaii. There are some serious threats to it, but there have been significant efforts to do restoration out here and protect this home of the critically endangered native bird, the palila. So this yellow and gray bird that feeds on a native plant you'll only find in Hawaii, the māmane, and that's what all of these pea family looking. It can be a shrub up to a mid-sized tree with yellow pea family flowers and pods, and that's what the bird feeds on. So just a beautiful landscape, and we're enjoying seeing what kind of birds we've never seen before, what crops up today.
So the palila, which is endemic to Hawaii and occurs nowhere else in the world, is restricted to less than 5% of its historic range on the Big Island. It's found only on the upper slopes of southwest Mauna Kea, which is the largest mountain in the world. And this species is a perfect example of evolution in the remote Hawaiian Islands from what was believed to be their ancestor, a Eurasian rosefinch that arrived from Asia. 55 species evolved on the islands. Palila belongs to a group of birds known as the Hawaiian honeycreepers, and 38 of these 55 species have already gone extinct. Further refining their classification, Palila is a finch-billed species, so they have that heavy or chunky bill used for seed eating. And of those finch-billed honeycreepers, there were 16 species in total, but all others have gone extinct. The Palila is the only finch-billed honeycreeper remaining. And it evolved to depend almost exclusively on māmane trees. They eat the immature seeds, the flower parts, drink the nectar, they'll eat the buds and young leaves, and the caterpillars in the seeds, they feed to their nestlings and fledglings as a high protein source. So 90% of their diet depends on māmane, making this bird a specialist. So because of this specialization, palilas have to migrate between low and high elevations to keep up with where the māmane is flowering and going to seed. So they'll flower first at lower elevations, and then they'll have to migrate up at a later time of the year to higher elevations where this tree species blooms and goes to seed later. So it's a very small area that we're talking about 25 square miles on the southwest slope of Mauna Kea. And it is the last landscape where continuous suitable habitat, that low to high elevation range dominated by Mauna forest occurs. And this is at about 6,600 feet up to about 9,600 feet above sea level. The palila has quite a history as one of the originally federally protected species. It was listed back in 1967, and it was listed as federally endangered species with the rewriting of the Endangered Species Act in 1973. And it had a federally designated critical habitat get listed in 1978. So it's the first species to be named as a plaintiff under the Endangered Species Act in a landmark case against Hawaii's Department of Land and Natural Resources. And it looks like they were ordered to eradicate feral sheep and goats from the critical habitat because they do prevent dry forest recovery and the reestablishment of māmane, that critical resource to the survival of the palila. Māmane, whose scientific name is Sophora chrysophylla, is also endemic to Hawaii. It's the dominant tree at the high elevations in those dry forests on Mauna Kea. It is in the Fabaceae family or the pea family, and it's either a large shrub up to about a 40-foot tall tree. Its seeds are toxic to other wildlife besides palila, and this is because of alkaloids in those seeds. But the leaves, limbs, and bark have no chemical defenses or armature, so no prickles, thorns, spines, and this leaves this species very susceptible to significant impact from browsing introduced ungulates that it didn't evolve with. So this plant species, its elevation range has contracted mostly due to human conversion of dry forest for agriculture and about 200 years of browsing by non-native ungulates. This tree species has very durable wood, and it was used by the native Hawaiians for house posts and beams, digging sticks, spears, spades, and firewood, among other uses. And later, cattle ranchers used it for fence posts. So while we saw plenty of māmane while hiking this trail, we did not see any palilas, but we did see and hear one of the most common native Hawaiian honeycreepers, the Hawaiian Amakihi. And this is another endemic species, but this little yellow bird is a generalist that eats the nectar of the māmane, but it'll also consume insects, berries, and other fruit pulp and tree sap. So as a result, it's found in all of the different forest types in Hawaii. And like all of the Hawaiian forest birds, it has been extirpated from areas below 3,000 feet above sea level, and this is due to a disease, avian malaria. And this is spread by mosquitoes that were first introduced in the water brought by European explorers, and then the disease spread from introduced birds. So avian malaria is the single biggest threat to Hawaii's native forest birds. And the Hawaiian Amakihi is being found at lower elevations, at least more lower elevations than the other native honeycreepers. And so they may be developing resistance to avian malaria. That's the hope anyway. This is the best footage I got of one. They're very fast and they flit in and out and kind of blend in with the māmane flowers. And Merlin, my Sound ID app, was really struggling. It only knows about 50% of the birds. And so birding by ear, with Merlin was not that successful in Hawaii. But here's a little sample of the Hawai'i Amakihi's rapid fire trill. Currently, the Mauna Kea Forest Restoration Project involves the Department of Land and Natural Resources at the state level and partners like the American Bird Conservancy, which one of the screenshots of Palila I took from one of their YouTube videos I showed earlier, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Arbor Day Foundation, and hundreds of volunteers. And these folks are all collaborating to restore Mauna Kea's māmane forests. There are a lot of threats to address. Introduced animals are a big problem. Sheep, goats, and cattle were introduced by European explorers in the late 1700s, and this was really the beginning of large-scale destruction of the dry forest that Palila depend upon. In the 1930s and 40s, they removed almost 50,000 feral ungulates from Mauna Kea, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the problem. And then sport hunting gained popularity in the 1950s, and they purposefully introduced European mouflon sheep that were then hybridized with other feral sheep on the island. And then there was cattle ranching in the 1950s. And so habitat degradation by introduced ungulates is probably the most important factor driving the Palila's range constriction and their population declines. Also, non-native predators are a big issue, especially feral cats, which were established by the mid-1800s, and they're probably the most threatening predator to Palila. Hawaii's forest birds didn't evolve with mammalian predators, and studies have shown that feral cats cause about 10% of the Palila nest failures each year. Rats and mongoose are also problematic. Invasive plants and insects are also threats. Invasive plants increase fire risks, like the fountain grass getting established everywhere, and thrips and wasps are impacting native vegetation and insect food resources for Palila. And then climate change, intensity, length of drought stresses the māmane trees, and that means less food resources available for Palila. And fire in a dry landscape with invasive species like fountain grass really providing quick fuel. It destroys habitat very, very quickly. So management efforts have included Palila translocation as well as captive rearing, the establishment and maintenance of fencing to keep out those very damaging browsing mammals, There have been forest restoration activities with seed collecting and seedling planting of māmane, and then monitoring the natural regeneration of the native species in this dry forest habitat. There have been predator control efforts, especially the removal of feral cats, as well as invasive plant control, especially trying to eradicate and minimize fountain grass and Cape ivy, and Palila surveys in the form of point counts to try to understand how this indicator of the health of the dry forests of Hawaii, how that species is doing. So it's very hard to capture the essence of a place in about 15 minutes, but I hope I've given you a sense of the scenery and the flora and fauna, and the threats, but also the restoration activities going on in this special place. I hope you get to visit someday. Take care and have a good week.